From the land of sky blue waters, it's having a drink with Mink. I'm your host, Jason Mink. Thanks for dropping by. We've got one humdinger of a show for you. Before we begin, I hope that you have a nice beverage ready. I know that I do. Okay, let's go. If you were a kid growing up in the 1960s, then you were spoiled for choice when it came to monsters. They were in theaters, on TV, and terrifyingly enough, in your toy box. Offered by Palmer Plastics in 1964, the Palmer Monsters were 3-inch tall, solid molded figurines produced in a variety of colors. Yellow, red, and green are common, while blue, butterscotch, and white are a bit harder to find. This set consisted of 8 cinematic terrors, some more familiar than others. We begin with the creature of the Black Lagoon, a character who had only arrived on the scene a decade before. This creature is green, a happy coincidence and one that adds to the desirability among collectors. He's sculpted in an appropriately menacing pose, with lots of little scales and gills to make him pop. I bet at least a few of these decorated fish tanks over the years. Next up is Cyclops from the 7th Voyage of Sinbad. This classic Ray Harryhausen creature comes in a shock yellow and features his deadly horn and one big honkin' eye. Another nice sculpt, not as detailed as the creature, but compelling and lively in its own right. He'd look great fighting your little green army men. Raising the roof, and it's a very Bella-esque Dracula. For being such a small figure, it's actually a decent, if unlicensed, likeness. He comes in his typical formal wear, complete with full-length cape. Having the figure cast in a blood red is a nice touch as well. Now all we need is a little plastic Ed Wood to follow him around with a camera. If Drac is making the scene, can Frankenstein be far behind? Perhaps the most recognizable of all the monsters, Frankie here is an appropriately hulking green slab of plastic. Palmer was even smart enough to sculpt him in his most iconic pose, with arms out to menace your other toys. And dig the bolts coming out of his neck. These figures don't have a lot of detail, but what's there is spot on. An odd choice, and the youngest of all these creatures, Gorgo, had only been around for 3 years before getting his own figure. He must have had a good agent. He's also in a character-appropriate green, with an oversized dinosaurish head full of pointy teeth. This guy would have been another great addition to those backyard army skirmishes. Just don't lose him in the grass, or Dad'll mow him. Another surprising choice would have to be It, the Terror from Beyond Space. Honestly, I thought this was the monster of Piedras Blancas, and looking at the two of them together, that's understandable. Another relative newbie, It has a nice sculpt, but is fairly passive in his pose. It's like he's having his picture taken at a family picnic or something. Still, there's a lot of detail in his face, giving this little fellow a big personality. Rounding out the monster power trio is the werewolf, although you can be forgiven for not seeing that at first. With the weird posture and extended hands, he has more of a Lionel Barrymore as Mr. Hyde quality, to be honest. Still, he's a werewolf, and we just have to accept that. Let's finish up with this roided-out King Kong figure. Perhaps the most stylized of all the sculpts, the figure does a good job capturing the primal fury that Kong was known for. Not only that, but this guy came with a little Fay Ray to carry around. Just make sure Kong holds on tight, as most loose examples are missing Miss Ray. Originally retailing for 99 cents, the Palmer Monsters came in a clear plastic blister with cardboard header. Here's a later bagged example, and note the price drop to 59 cents. At that price, you can't afford not to buy them. These 3-inch figures are a perfect example of the consumer-driven 1960s, a time when everything was bright, colorful, and made of non-breakable plastic. Even our monsters. Next up, old comics is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but don't go throwing these around. They're delicate enough as it is. We begin with some pre-code horror in the form of Fantastic Fears, number 6, continuing the numbering from Farrell's Captain Jet number 5. In our first terrifying tale, a descendant of the Iron Maiden's inventor is haunted by the torture device's victims. It's your standard revenge from beyond the grave tale with some kooky-looking monsters thrown in for color. Unconventional panel layouts add to the unsettling nature of the tale, highlighting the weirdness on display. Broom for a Witch is a wild tale of possession and murder, with a resolution so far to left field it had to have been thrown from the parking lot. As our tale begins, newlyweds Dan and Alicia Morrison move into their new dream home. The place is perfect, except for the fact that a witch named Tabitha used to live here, and is buried in the basement. The presence of a young woman revives the dormant evil, and Tabby claws her way out of the earth, quickly possessing the young bride. First things first, the switched witch now decides to blow the stink off with a nice broom ride around the county, one which catches the attention of two passing airliner pilots. The next morning, Dan is startled by the change in his blushing bride. For a start, she wants goat's milk for breakfast. Do they sell it at Trader Joe's? Oh yeah, and she's developed a playfully homicidal streak, as evidenced by her attempting to run over this errant miner. A flummoxed Dan seeks the guidance of Dr. Sykes, who breaks the unfortunate news. Alicia is possessed. How he can be so sure is anyone's guess, but he's damn convincing as he talks Dan into tying her up and burning her alive. And while the thing that was once Alicia pleads for its life, the flames make short work of the witchy homewrecker. And if you're worried about this story having a sad ending, don't. It turns out this car crash victim's body is the ideal place for Alicia's displaced soul. It would take a scientist to explain, but we'll let Doc Sykes have a crack at it. If a Body Kill a Body is our final story of the issue, and it concerns, you guessed it, the Vengeful Dead, an endless source of uncanny entertainment. Lovers Angus and Mary are both brutally slain in the midst of a blood feud between their families. Seeing as how this is comics and all, it's not long before Angus is up and around again in his ectoplasmic incarnation, and he wakes old Mary up to boot. They'll rest later. It's time for sweet Rowenge. This comes in the form of Mary poisoning Angus's pa, and Angus pushing Mary's ma off a tower. These deaths lead to the family's final horrific confrontation, which leaves no soul alive on either side. With that, our ghostly couple are free to haunt the nighted hills of Scotland, finally finding the peace that they never knew in life. I'm a nut for teen humor, so I snapped up these issues of the Killroys. Produced by our friends at American Comics Group, the stories mostly focus on kids Natch and Katie Killroy, along with their colorful cast of pals. The stories are breezy and good-natured fun, peppered with the hep lingo of the day. Comics are great for improving your vocabulary, and, as the RD always said, it pays to enrich your word power. Painless Dentist sees Natch and Jackson take a sudden interest in their dental care, perhaps an odd topic for a comic, but certainly rife for corny jokes. We're treated to this old chestnut, groan-worthy then, but unforgivable now in today's hypersensitive climate. So what if it's funny? You're still not supposed to laugh. A sometimes feature of this book was College Capers by artist Al Hartley. Yes, the same man who brought the good book to Riverdale was responsible for this, although you wouldn't know it. It's clear at one point Hartley had his own aesthetic, instead of being just another Archie House-style clone. Any Hubba Hubbard fans out there? I mean, that name alone should win you over. He doesn't really get much to do here, as his mutton-headed pals are the strip's primary players, but dig that crazy patter. I mean, it really sends me. In this story, Natch, Judy, and the gang learned about the latest school dance. In order to make sure that every student who attends gets to dance, they'll be assigned a random partner, an idea that no one but Jackson likes. Typical Jackson. He stresses it's for charity, and the gang agrees to go out of guilt. But they're not happy about it. And dig these three, obviously the prime beneficiaries of this new system. Once they have their tickets, all the kids begin to furiously trade, leading to Portia winning a dance with movie star Robert Taylor. Perhaps a bit of a step down for a celebrity. I'm thinking he needs to talk to Gorgo's agent. In the end, everyone has a swell time, especially Jackson. Typical Jackson. There's a feeling certain old comics bring, like lost pieces of a puzzle that you forgot you were building. Not all books have it, but when it's present, it's unmistakable, that sense of wonder and potentiality that vibrates your very molecules. For me, this is such a book. Well, the cover, anyway. But the insides are pretty good, too. To wit, First Choice, Last Choice sees Hal and Linda struggle to navigate the seas of young love. Seems these two have decided to date other people, but they're still in each other's hair, as short as it may be. And you've got to admire old Stuffy here. He's clearly just a pawn between these two, and yet he makes the best of it, in spite of Linda's caustic commentary. If you can't be anything else, at least be a Stuffy. A Don Blake milquetoast type, Hal inexplicably manages to not only get a smooch, but send Linda's thoughts reeling like a top. Nothing like a few Shakespeare quotes to punch up your tale of teen woe. However, instead of a Romeo and Juliet-style third act, these two just get together and join the establishment. I reckon it was either that or explode. The book does something very odd, with 2 entire pages in black and white. And it's not just a fluke, as these pages are sequential. I reckon this was a cost-cutting move, and a jarring one at that, although by the end, everything seems to go back to our normal 4-color programming. On the back cover is this tantalizing offer of 24 comics for only $1. One can only imagine the treasures that might have been part of this offer. Most likely old backstock. I'm guessing there were at least a few episodes of this show in there. Black Diamond Western offered 52 big pages of story and art for your dime, although the Charles Biro cover alone is worth it. The expression on this guy's face is something else. It's the hook that makes you buy the book. And be glad you did. Statistor Bumpinovich is the hard-headed hero that we need, but don't deserve. Making the scene in this local bar, he's called a bald-faced fabricator by this local yokel, and them's fighting words where Statistor is from. He makes a bet he can bust through a bolted door, and before you can say neck brace, he butts it down. However, instead of resolving the issue, this just leads to a terrible tussle, one that Staniel's fully capable of resolving with fists, not guns. Also present is a story with art by George Duska, perhaps best known for his long run on Marvel's Incredible Hulk. The IW Super Comic story is one that continues to fascinate. If you don't know, IW stands for Israel Waldman. Waldman had little interest in comics, but was happy to exploit the work of others for his own gain, disregarding concepts like licensing and intellectual property for profit. Word is, Waldman acquired a printing company and, along with it, printer's plates from previously published comic books, as well as a stash of unpublished stories. In Waldman's eyes, this material was now his to do with as he pleased, and he went into the comics business, reprinting work that originally appeared in publications like Avon, EC, Fiction House, and many others. Initially bearing the initials of its publisher, eventually this odd mishmash of stories was issued under the Super Comics banner. Like this one, Fantastic Adventures 16, which reprints Steinway's Dark Shadows 2 from March of 1958. Hexes, Causes and Cures is an odd title, but that's okay. It's an odd story. Mike Brandt and his wife move out to Green Acres, but lament the superstitious nature of their neighbors. How can old Granny Suggs here believe in such things? Well, for a start, her name is Granny Suggs, so I think the precedent is already set. They head into town and fall afoul of Cal Cooper, local grouch and owner of the general store. "What you want today I ain't got." Yeah, he's a real firecracker. When Mike catches him overcharging for produce, Cal promises to hex him, and the two are whisked out of the store before things can get any worse. Using his backhill tricks, Cal creates a totem to hex Mike, and what do you know? It works great, dropping the city slicker quicker than a 50-pound bag of yams. And there's nothing the doc can do. He's trained in medicine, not sorcery. It's up to Sally to dope out the totem's been hidden in their archery set, and she's been the one inflicting the pain on her husband. Thinking quickly, she makes her move, with Cal coming out of the woodwork to try and stop her. As Mike is now recovered, he gives the shopkeeper a good scuff for his troubles, and Cal scampers away, all now right with the world. If only life were like that. Following on, it's Don't Be a Stumbling Spook. This humorous little diversion features two specters looking to up their haunting game. They seek out Emily Ghost, expert on such matters, and for 2 bottles of embalming fluid, she agrees to take their case. Right off the bat, so to speak, the place could be a lot spookier, and she makes some dust and cobweb-based adjustments. I really enjoy the art style here. I wish I could tell you who drew it, but that appears to be lost to time. Before we can get much further, this here sweet fellow bursts in, derailing the proceedings. Come on, buddy. Haven't you heard of waiting your turn? Then again, couth doesn't seem to be his strong suit. Also, I think he may have eaten Jimmy Olsen and stolen his clothes. Better check for a signal watch. Finally, there's this. Either that is a really big man or a very small bed. And I don't even want to know what's going on under the sheet there. We'll come back later. Our next issue is Fantastic Adventures 17, reprinting stories from 7C Comics number 6 from Leader Enterprises. This one features a cover by Ross Andrew and Mike Esposito. If that wasn't already exciting enough, the interiors are by legendary Good Girl artist Matt Baker. Echoes of an A-Bomb is a wild tale of excitement, intrigue, and action in the high seas manner. The rapid pacing and uncomplicated narrative allow Baker's art many memorable moments. It's easy to see the influence Baker had on later greats like Dave Stevens, providing sumptuous, detail-rich panels you could practically wander off into. It's baffling how some public domain characters are allowed to linger in limbo. Tugboat Tessie here certainly deserves another shot. Clearly ahead of her time then, I think now's her big moment. Seems Union thugs are shaking down Pops and aren't going to stop until he coughs up. When Tessie gets word, she goes into action. Only it's not the Union. These are free enterprise thugs, just picking on an old man. This gets Tessie's dander up but good. She goes into action. Again. Later that night, the thugs sneak onto Pop's boat with dubious intention. To their surprise, instead of an old codger, they find this surly sailor, and she's none too pleased. Tessie gives them a what for, and they run off. Overjoyed, Pops gives Tessie a big what one, and she socks him upside the jaw for his temerity. Boundaries, Pops. Boundaries. And while these may have flown beneath your radar before, now you know. For affordability, variety, and all-around entertainment value, IW are Super Comics. Here's another issue of the Killroys, and hey, I think it's one of the ghosts from a few stories back. This is a lovely little cover whose colors and composition really catch the eye. Inside, they say the dog is man's best friend, but you may think otherwise soon enough. Our story begins with Judy and Natch making a beeline for the ringing phone. Remember when you had to do that? Boy, we are old. Anyway, family patriarch Edgar is forced to watch his boss's dog for a week, which goes about as well as you'd expect. And this is a great little panel, with Judy asking Natch if he has any new comic books. Little background gags like this really add a lot to the reading experience, providing nuance and texture to an otherwise two-dimensional world. Later in the issue, Natch gets a flat tire, which gives us the sound effect of the week, Bluey. That's right, cross it off your cards and be ready to play again next week. And look out, Hubba Hubbard, Wilbur Morton is in town. Judging from the gal's reactions, they weren't expecting him either. And what's up with Jackson's knees here? Did he spend a lot of time on him or something? Very odd. Jungle Adventure comics were huge in the Golden Age, and no wonder. It's a lot easier to draw scantily clad people in a bunch of trees than Coupe de Villes and big city skylines. Okay, I'm oversimplifying a bit, but there is something to it. Jungle Adventure comics allowed stories to play out by their own rules in otherwise unrealistic settings. After all, you couldn't base stories like this in Toledo. The animal control warden simply wouldn't go for it. And while this story is ostensibly about Kanga, it's his fiery redhead companion who does most of the heavy lifting here. Sisters are doing it for themselves, at least when it comes to shooting guys. Written by H. Rider Haggard, She is a classic adventure novel which has remained in print for over 140 years. The tale concerns a journey into the heart of Africa in search of a lost kingdom and the glories to be found there. Specifically, an immortal goddess of such indescribable beauty that all who see her fall under her sway. There are superstitious natives, beautiful maidens, and a pillar of fire that grants eternal life. With stunning artwork by Vince Napoli, this classic's illustrated style publication does its best to hit all the novel's major beats, although it's tough to pack it all into a single comic. There are many full-page illustrations that impress, even today, with some dazzling color choices. You can actually find this reprinted by PS Art Books if you want to track a copy down. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week. Same drink time, same Mink channel.